the news.
Hi, I'm Tessa with Brainrot News with a few bits of news for you to choke on from April 8th. The U.S. Supreme Court has officially blocked a lower court order that would have required the Trump administration to reinstate tens of thousands of federal workers, roughly 16,000 probationary employees, fired en masse during a so-called downsizing initiative. 6 major agencies were affected: Veteran Affairs, Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Interior, and Treasury. So nothing important. A federal judge in California had previously ruled that these firings violated federal law because, you can't just boot 16,000 people like they're extras in a budget cut. But the Supreme Court stepped in, not to say these firings were okay, but to declare that the nonprofits challenging them didn't have legal standing. So that means even if it's wrong, you're not the right people to complain about it. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented because they haven't completely abandoned reality, but this makes the 3rd time recently that the Supreme Court has sided with the Trump administration in disputes over mass terminations. It's getting to the point where we might as well start calling SCOTUS HR for Trump Incorporated. Meanwhile, many of those fired workers are still in limbo, technically on paid leave because of another case out of Maryland that covers 19 states and DC. The Justice Department is naturally appealing that too, though, because when it comes to screwing over public workers, this administration is committed to excellence. So over 24,000 probationary federal employees have been fired since Trump took office. That's not a drain the swamp strategy, that's an institutional arson campaign targeting the very people who keep your food safe, your benefits running, your national parks open, and your veterans cared for. It's not about efficiency, it's about building a government so hollow it can't say no. This is not just a legal technicality. It's a slow motion collapse of civil infrastructure with a side of judicial indifference. The next time the USDA fumbles a food safety alert or the VA delays care for your grandfather, remember this moment. It's not an accident, it's policy. Under a new agreement signed by the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Homeland Security's very own Christie Smiles Through Fascism gnome, the IRS will now share tax records of immigrants suspected of being in the U.S. illegally with ICE. Yes, the agency that exists to collect revenue is now a snitch for the deportation machine. ICE will cross-reference this data with its own files to hunt down, detain, and deport undocumented immigrants. They're pitching this as a way to catch identity fraud and benefit scams, as if the real issue in American tax policy is an undocumented line cook claiming $42 in earned income credit. This marks yet another page ripped straight from Trump's "you have no privacy and even less humanity" playbook. And if you're wondering, yes, this is a legal and ethical nightmare. Tax privacy laws have existed for nearly a century to prevent this exact kind of weaponization of the IRS. Even Reagan didn't go this far. Experts are warning that this move might be flat out illegal. IRS officials could personally be held liable for violating disclosure laws. But I mean, who cares, right? The real goal here isn't law and order, it's fear. It's telling every immigrant, file your taxes and we might deport you for it. You know who this hurts the most? All of us. Because if immigrants stop filing taxes out of fear, we all lose out on billions in revenue. You want roads, schools, healthcare infrastructure? Cool. Say goodbye to it if you're scaring away taxpayers. But that's the idea, I guess, isn't it? Starve the state, blame the vulnerable, then privatize whatever ruins are left. They've turned the IRS into ICE's data pipeline, repurposing a civic institution into a surveillance tool. It's not about fraud prevention. It's about control, compliance, and cruelty. If you think it stops at immigrants, you haven't been paying attention. The United States was expecting a travel boom in 2025, ready to cash in on all those wide-eyed globetrotters eager to visit the land of overpriced hotels, terrifying tipping culture, and lukewarm coffee. But instead, we've got a tourism nosedive, with international arrivals falling by over 11% in March alone. Experts had projected a nearly 9% growth. What did we get instead? Well, we're staring down a 9.4% drop and a potential $9 billion in revenue crater. This isn't about airfare or exchange rates. This is about Donald Trump turning America into a global pariah state. You know, things are bad when Swedes, the most neutral, meatball-loving tourist on earth, are too offended to visit. And Canada, down 40% in bookings, because not everyone loves a vacation where they get sneered at over their passport while Trump calls their country the 51st state. Europe, also bailing. Germans, Brits, and Swedes are canceling US trips like it's a Fire Festival rerun. And China, they've got their own issues, but somehow Trump made them nostalgic for literally any other country. This mass boycott has a name: the Trump slump. It's not just about his face on the news, it's about his tariffs, fascist-friendly foreign policy, support for European neo-nationalists, and his uncanny ability to say the worst thing at the worst times. When your president is slapping tariffs on your allies and flirting with Putin like it's a Cold War rom-com, yeah, people don't want to bring their families to Disneyland. This kind of drop doesn't fix itself overnight. Experts say we may not see pre-pandemic tourism levels until 2029 now, unless we can somehow convince foreigners that the MAGA hats are just a weird call adult and not a national uniform. So next time you wonder why the local hotels are struggling, or why flight prices are climbing, or why your favorite restaurants suddenly closed, just remember, it's not the economy, it's that the world hates us again. And unlike last time, they have Google Translate and better options. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a 29-year-old Maryland man who was legally protected from deportation back in 2019 when an immigration judge acknowledged that if he were sent back to El Salvador, he'd likely be hunted down by gangs. So he was granted relief, a legal win, case closed. Fast forward to March 2025, Trump's administration deported him anyway. They just, poof, put him on a plane, no due process, no warning, just an oops that landed him straight into El Salvador's terrorism confinement center, which is basically a real-life dystopian torture complex run by a regime that thinks human rights are optional. U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes looked at this and rightfully said, "This is wholly lawless." She ordered the government to bring Kilmar back, because we're supposed to be a country of laws, not a country where bureaucrats get to ruin lives with clerical errors and then shrug like it's spilled coffee. But instead of obeying the order, the Trump administration appealed, claiming, "Oh no, we can't bring him back. He's not in U.S. custody anymore," as if they weren't the ones who shoved him onto a plane in the first place. That's like setting a house on fire and saying you can't save anyone inside because it's already burning. Now Chief Justice John Roberts has stepped in not to help Kilmar, but to pause the ruling that would have forced the government to fix its grotesque mistake. Just a little stay while the court figures out whether someone illegally deported has the right to be undeported. You know, basic human dignity stuff. What this case really shows is that under the Trump administration, immigration law isn't about justice. It's about cruelty and chaos as policy. And when the system screws up in a life or death way, there is no urgency to correct it, no boots on the ground to bring him home, just delays, finger pointing, and a Supreme Court more concerned with procedure than people. The administration calls this an administrative error, but a man's life is hanging in the balance, and if we're not willing to fix the mistake, then it's obvious this was on purpose. The Department of Homeland Security, now basically running on vibes and xenophobia, has revoked the legal status of over 900,000 migrants who entered the US using the CBP-1 app, a tool that was supposed to bring some order and humanity to the border. These people, mostly families from places like Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, and Venezuela, followed the rules, scheduled appointments, entered legally, and were granted 2-year parole to work, live, and not die in a ditch. Now, the Trump administration has told them to abandon the United States. Seriously, that's the actual language used in the termination notices. Just a polite little pack up your kids and dreams and get the hell out. They've even rebranded the CBP app as CBP Home, which sounds like the discount version of a Ring doorbell, but with more fascism. This isn't just cruel, it's catastrophic. These people who've put down roots, taken jobs, enrolled their children in school, and now they're being told their legality has an expiration date based on who's president, and it's not just the CBP-1 migrants. The administration is also terminating parole for another 532,000 people from nations that are falling apart. These folks didn't sneak in. They applied, they were approved, and now they're being retroactively criminalized by an administration obsessed with cruelty as policy. Why? Because national security, apparently. Yeah, families showing up to their appointments with paperwork and strollers are clearly an existential threat to a country with the world's biggest military budget. This isn't about safety. It's not about law and order. It's about erasing Biden's policies and replacing them with open hostility towards the most vulnerable. It's about turning legal migration into a game of bait and switch. Come in legally and we'll deport you later anyway. What happens to the employers who hired these people, the schools with their children, the hospitals treating them, the communities they become a part of? None of that matters to Trump's DHS. All that matters is sending a message. You are not welcome here, even when you follow the rules. This isn't border security, it's state-sponsored instability. The former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice, if we can still call him that without laughing, was appointed by GOP Assembly Speaker Robin Vos in 2021 to investigate Donald Trump's favorite fever dream, that the 2020 election was stolen. And what was the result? Oh, a $2.3 million taxpayer-funded nothing burger garnished with lawsuits, shredded documents, and the legal equivalent of a flaming clown car. Now, Gableman has agreed to step away from lawyering voluntarily after the state's Office of Lawyer Regulation filed a 10-count complaint against him. That includes fun things like making false statements, disrupting court proceedings like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama reboot, leaking confidential info, and destroying public records that watchdogs had legally requested. In other words, the man broke the law investigating imaginary people who allegedly broke the law. Peak GOP logic. This was the same Gableman who openly admitted he did not understand how elections worked, which is sort of like hiring a vegan to run your steakhouse. He also made bizarre, insulting courtroom comments and operated more like a QAnon on live streamer than a legal professional. Even Speaker Voss, who gave Gableman the job under pressure from Trump, eventually called him an embarrassment and pulled the plug in 2022. Gableman tried to retaliate with recall campaigns, but they flopped harder than Truth Social's IPO. So now he's in timeout, hoping the state Supreme Court, now controlled by liberals thanks to one of the most expensive elections in state history, signs off on the deal. Spoiler, they probably will, because it turns out you can't just cosplay Giuliani and expect to keep your law license. It's nice to see at least one grifter face some accountability for turning the big lie into a cottage industry, and for anyone else still crying fraud, here's your reality check. The only election crime in Wisconsin was wasting everyone's time and money on a conspiracy theory that was debunked before it even started. Netanyahu arrived in DC expecting a bro hug and a blank check, but instead, surprisingly, walked into a diplomatic cold shower. He came to ask for three things: more pressure on Iran, tariff relief for Israeli exports, and support in Israel's regional beef with Turkey over Syria. He got exactly none of them. Trump, in a rare display of diplomatic curiosity, which usually means just whispering to dictators and complimenting their uniforms, said he was planning talks with Iran. Yeah, Iran, the same country he once wanted to bomb for being rude on Twitter. This little plot twist must have hit Bibi like a drone strike to the ego. When Netanyahu begged for tariff relief, Trump basically handed him a brochure that said, "Make Israel pay again." Even after Israeli officials reportedly offered concessions, Trump shrugged it off. Maybe Bibi forgot that Trump only does things to benefit himself. And just to really twist the knife, Trump praised Turkey's role in Syria and told Netanyahu to chill out. That's right, he told Netanyahu to be less aggressive. We're now officially through the looking glass. And when it came to Gaza, Trump went full vague optimism. There's gonna be peace, maybe hostages released. I'm hearing good things, which I think means someone lied to him 5 minutes ago and he liked how it sounded. Meanwhile, Netanyahu doubled down on continued military operations because, leadership is when you double the civilian death toll while your approval rating nosedives into the Mediterranean. Publicly, they both slapped on their fake smiles and called the meeting a success. Privately, Lil Bibi's team admitted it was more like a failed Kickstarter campaign. It turns out even authoritarian bromance has its limits, especially when both parties are more focused on saving their own skin than keeping their shared delusions synchronized. The bottom line, the supposed ironclad US-Israeli alliance is showing cracks, and for once, Trump isn't rolling over to enable more war crimes. But don't get it twisted, this isn't a moral pivot, it's just a case of chaotic self-interest colliding with bad PR optics. Because even if Trump is giving you the cold shoulder, maybe it's time to rethink your foreign policy, or at least your media strategy. Just to underscore Netanyahu's diplomatic success, Israeli forces killed at least 25 more Palestinians in Gaza overnight, men, women, and children. Because peace is just around the corner is a pile of fresh civilian corpses. President Trump has signed a series of executive orders that could be summed up with the phrase, "Let's make America wheeze again." The orders aim to resurrect the long-decaying corpse of the US coal industry, a sector that's been circling the drain for decades. But don't worry, Trump's got a shovel and a can of Red Bull, and he's ready to dig up this fossilized job creator like it's the Lazarus of lung disease. At the heart of this coal-fueled comeback is a plan to extend the lives of aging, wheezing, coal-fired power plants to meet the escalating electricity demands of our brave new world of AI, data centers, and electric vehicles. That's right, we're powering the future with technology of the late 1800s, because what better way to train ChatGPT than with a steady stream of carcinogenic air and groundwater poison? But that's not all, folks. Trump's orders will also lift restrictions on coal mining on federal lands and reverse Obama-era protections, because if there's one thing Trump hates more than clean air, it's the memory of a black president doing anything useful. And who's going to coordinate this coal-stained fever dream? Well, Trump's forming a new team with a name so Orwellian, I thought it was a joke. The National Energy Dominance Council. That's not a policy group, that's a Bond villain syndicate. Environmental groups are understandably losing their collective minds, calling the move a climate regression, because it is. It's like trying to save a burning house by lighting more fires, but in Trump's America, if it smokes, it votes. And while the coal industry is thrilled, clutching its blackened pearls and hoping this means one last ride on the gravy train, experts are calling bullshit. Global markets aren't exactly itching to invest in technology that poisons water, melts ice caps, and gives children asthma, but hey, what's a little irreversible planetary damage when you can buy a few extra votes in West Virginia? At this point, reviving coal is less about energy policy and more about a political kink, a filthy little fetish for the aesthetic of industrial ruin. Trump isn't solving a crisis, he's staging a coal cosplay for a base that equates clean energy with weakness and climate science with witchcraft. So as we pave the way for AI to simulate human thought and electric vehicles to cruise down solar-powered highways, remember, we're powering that future with coal plants that should have been scrapped back when dial-up was cutting edge. I guess progress is smoggy sunsets, collapsing lungs, and leaders who think clean coal is a real thing and not a punchline from a dystopian sitcom. Stay tuned, America. The lights might be on, but we're choking in the dark. The Trump administration has withdrawn 11 pieces of guidance related to the Americans with Disabilities Act because apparently accessibility is just too damn complicated for capitalism. These now trash documents weren't laws, mind you, they were non-binding guides, helpful suggestions, blueprints for not being a complete societal failure. They covered things like accessible parking, hotel rooms, store maintenance, and hospital visitation during a global pandemic. You know, frivolous nonsense like making sure your grandma in a wheelchair can visit your cousin dying of COVID without needing a grappling hook and divine intervention. But nope, gone, deleted, erased, because helping people with disabilities is just too much of a regulatory burden. The Department of Justice says this move is part of a bold effort to promote economic growth. Yeah, apparently they think the economy has been held hostage by too many wheelchair ramps and working elevators. According to disability advocates and people with hearts, this rollback is more than just bureaucratic nonsense. It's a giant middle finger to one of the most vulnerable populations in America. Without clear guidance, businesses are now wandering the ADA wilderness like deregulated toddlers with a blueprint for a rocket. Compliance will drop, lawsuits will rise, and good luck finding an accessible hotel room unless your wheelchair comes with rocket thrusters. The ADA itself hasn't been repealed yet, but removing these documents strips away the very tools people use to follow it. It's like telling someone they're still welcome to play Monopoly, but ripping the rulebook in half and lighting it on fire. The Trump administration still insists it supports equity, because equity is apparently making it harder for disabled people to get into a store. This isn't about efficiency, it's about ideology. It's about a government that sees any accommodation, any compassion, any deviation from profit at all costs as weakness. This move won't just affect disabled Americans, it affects all of us. Because the moment a society decides accessibility is optional, it's already declared certain lives less valuable. But hey, at least your local mega chain might save a few bucks by not repainting the accessible parking space. Maybe they'll pass those savings on to you, right after they deny your disabled cousin entry to the bathroom because the toilet seat's now considered a regulatory burden. Sleep tight, America. Hope you don't sprain an ankle. Mobility is officially a luxury. In today's edition of What If, the Constitution, but make it cruelty-pilled, the Supreme Court has officially said sure, why not, allowing President Donald Trump to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law so old it predates electricity, women's rights, and flavor in British food, also they can deport Venezuelan migrants, because nothing screams modern immigration policy like dusting off a wartime statute written when people still thought bathing caused disease. Trump, ever the innovator in authoritarian cosplay, declared the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua an invading force, essentially LARPing a foreign war so he could start ejecting migrants like a bouncer at Mar-a-Lago on Cinco de Mayo. Under his order, migrants were being shipped to a Salvadoran prison without hearings, lawyers, or even a chance to Google what the hell just happened. Fortunately, or depressingly, depending on your expectations, the Supreme Court slapped a due process band-aid on the situation. In a 5-4 ruling, the court said, okay, Donnie, you can keep pretending you're Andrew Jackson, but you gotta give them a court hearing first. Of course, those hearings will happen in Texas, where legal neutrality goes to die and immigrants go to wait indefinitely in a concrete box. And let's be clear, this ruling isn't a triumph of checks and balances. It's a hall pass for a man who once asked why we couldn't just bomb hurricanes. The court gave him an inch, and Trump's already asking if that includes catapults. Justice Sotomayor, the last adult in the room, dissented with all the restraint she could muster, essentially screaming into the void that maybe we shouldn't normalize mass deportations based on vibes and 18th century paranoia, but who's listening when the executive branch is citing state secrets to dodge legal compliance and hinting at judicial impeachments like it's a new party trick. But I'm sure Trump's base cheered this victory for law and order, because when they say law, they mean laws that let you deport brown people with medieval efficiency, and when they say order, they mean no judges getting in the way. It's frontier justice with a federal seal of approval. This isn't immigration policy, it's authoritarianism wrapped in colonial parchment, and it sets a precedent that any future president, red hat or not, could weaponize old laws to criminalize entire populations at the stroke of a Sharpie. That's all for Brainrot News. Like and subscribe before Trump starts using the Quartering Act to station ICE agents in your living room.